One of the most popular tabletop games of all time has finally got a shooter worthy of its name. Sure, we've seen Space Hulk, Deathwing, Necromunda, Hired Gun, and Darktide in recent years, but each of those titles have had mixed receptions from fans, requiring multiple patches to win over said fans' favor, with Darktide still struggling to break into the positive category on Steam. So let me tell you, when I say that Boltgun did it right, I mean they f***ing did it right. Now I have a healthy appreciation for the 40K universe, and I've even played some of the tabletop game IRL.
Wow.
Combine that with my unhealthy passion for the shooters of old, and you can bet your sweet baby Ray's briskets I wish-listed Boltgun on day one. And boy oh boy did it deliver, so today I'm gonna tell you exactly why.
The Emperor's will be done.
Boltgun is not just a great game for 40K fans, it's a great game for shooter fans in general, and I think it will appeal to both the casual and the hardcore. It nails exactly what we love about the boomer shooter subgenre of FPS games, and I'm really stoked that a franchise as large as Warhammer 40K is embracing it. Since the start of this boomer shooter revival, most of them have been developed by solo developers or small indie studios, so seeing a Warhammer title in this genre is pretty exciting in my opinion. But if I'm being honest, I'm actually shocked a 40K boomer shooter has not been done before, as there's nothing better than running around as a big ass ultramarine and caving in the pixelated skulls of heretics. So hats off to Auroch Digital and Focus Entertainment for taking the plunge and making it happen. While the Warhammer 40,000 universe is dripping with some of the thickest lore you can find, this game is surprisingly light with its story, which is great for this type of game because it will attract a lot of non-Warhammer fans, so a light story is a good choice here. The story is mostly told through cutscene briefings that precede each of the game's 3 chapters. The old school art style of the briefings reminded me of LucasArts classics such as Dark Forces or even the adventure game Full Throttle. I really love the direction they went with these cutscenes, as pixel art not only looks really cool, but more importantly it fits the retro vibe to a T, and it helps bridge that gap between gameplay and cutscenes so there's no stylistic disconnect. We play as Malum Cato, a veteran space marine who is sent with his squad to the Forge world Graia to investigate rogue Imperium scientists experimenting with a power source left behind by Inquisitor Drogon. The space marine dropship crashes upon entry to Graia, and we're the only one who survived, and we must now complete the mission alone, which is fine because just like your typical 90s throwback, we're a one-man army, baby. From a lore perspective, while not overly complex, Boltgun's story still has some interesting implications because Graia is the planet from Space Marine 40K that came out in 2011. Inquisitor Drogon, or rather a Chaos Demon disguised as Drogon, was the antagonist of that game. So this means that Boltgun takes place somewhere after the Space Marine game and has a connection to it. Malum Cato is also familiar with Captain Titus, the player character from Space Marine, as Malum says this as one of his taunts.
I will finish the work Captain Titus started.
He also mentions Sidonis, who died in Space Marine 40K.
Sidonis laid down his life for this planet. I protect his sacrifice.
I'll be interested to see if we get a Malum Cato cameo in the Space Marine sequel coming out later this year. And while I'm nerding out on lore, one more thing I'd like to point out to my fellow 40K nerds is that Malum Cato wears the classic MK6 Corvus helmet, aka a beaky helmet as seen in the official art of the game. These helmets were the standard design of Space Marines in the early days of the tabletop game, so while we have a throwback shooter, we also have a throwback Space Marine design, which I thought was a really nice touch. Visually, Boltgun nails the chunky pixelated art style, but there's a uniqueness to it with its very vibrant palette and texture effects where the chaos energies are bleeding into the world. Each level transports us to a spectacular environment showcasing the classic Darth Gothic cathedrals, smelting forges, the planet's surface, and monumental industrial structures. One nitpick I have to point out though is that the outside areas had a different level of pixelation in the textures than the inside areas. This was not immersion breaking or anything, but it was the only example of sloppy I found in this game, so I thought I'd point it out. Also, there is a retro slider in the game options, and while I personally never used it, I did record a little bit of video showcasing it for you guys. Filling these environments are a host of enemies that look just like the tabletop minis, as these were 3D models that were later converted into sprites. Just to name a few, we got various cultists, chaos space marines, various demons, fucking plague toads, and hordes of little nurglings that go pop. Unfortunately, there are no orcs in this game, which is surprising to me considering this planet was swarming with them when Captain Titus was here. Out of the many aspects that Boltgun needed to nail to solidify itself as a solid throwback shooter as well as a proper 40k game is the movement and the control of the Space Marine. The movement is fast and fluid, with the sprint button oftentimes being a bit too much for certain areas. Just like games before it, sprinting, circle strafing, and bunny hopping in the arenas will all be required, as fights in this game can be incredibly hectic. There is also a charge ability, which admittedly I really didn't use enough. In between some of the awesome power-ups, the hefty footfalls when running, the melee of the chainsword, and how fast you can eviscerate your enemies, I would say that the feeling of being a Stern Guard veteran Space Marine was indeed nailed. Also, as a side note, taunting the enemies as you splatter their guts against the wall is a great touch. It just feels like something a zealotous Space Marine would do after dispatching a host of heretics.
I will unleash you!
However, despite being so powerful, you can take a ton of damage and take it quickly. I felt like the on-screen indicators did not really do a good enough job of letting me know when I was taking big damage. The result was that I had to constantly focus on my HUD in the middle of a hectic fight instead of relying on an indicator like a flashing red screen when taking a big hit. If there was a better indicator, I'd only look at my health when I got injured, rather than all the time because I'm unsure of how much damage I'm taking amongst the chaos. And there is chaos aplenty. To help you navigate it is your deep arsenal of heretic splattering weapons. The classic Boltgun will be your go-to, no surprise there, backed up by your chainsword, a chonky shotgun, plasma gun that's more like a rocket launcher than anything else, and the heavy bolter. These weapons make up your primary arsenal, as at the start of the game you will play with them for quite some time before you get to equip some of the bigger toys. The bolter is effective for nearly the whole campaign, and you can find ammunition upgrades for it hidden throughout the levels. These upgrades, such as the Dragonfire bolts, are taken from the tabletop game, and they make the gun significantly more powerful. The chainsword reminded me of all the glory killing you had to do in Doom Eternal, and it was quite fitting in this game. However, unlike Doom, the melee did not feel forced, and I found myself not using it very much, if I'm being honest, as I tend to not melee much in my FPS titles. There are also machine spirits you can pick up as secrets, and they buff whatever weapon you're currently holding in your hand. I did not figure this out until later in the game, and it made me wish the game had a codex or something to read about the finer points. Another example of why I think a codex would be good in this game is because the enemies and the weapons have levels to them, and even after I've beaten the game, I still have no idea what the levels mean or how they affect gameplay, if at all. It seems like an unnecessary addition, or like a mechanic left from an earlier build or something. Later in the game, the Melt-A-Gun and the Vengeance Launcher are added to the arsenal. There are other weapons too, but I don't want to spoil everything, so I'll just show you some clips instead of explaining how they work.
Gotcha, bitch!
There are 3 chapters of the game, and each chapter has 8 levels. For me, it took me about 10 hours to finish the game, and that was with me taking my sweet time and hunting for all the secrets. After I finished the game, I spent another couple of hours going back to levels I didn't quite find all the secrets in, and then going and hunting them down. So I feel the content is very fair for the price point. One critique I have about the chapter system is that at the start of each chapter, your weapons don't carry over. And while I understand that older games like Doom, Quake, and Duke Nukem did this, that was mostly due to the business model at the time, because games were sold in pieces back then. I found myself wishing that Boltgun would have done away with this archaic decision, as I felt like it really affected the pacing of the game. I would have much preferred keeping my weapons and experience harder levels as the chapters went on, rather than having to backpedal and recollect all the weapons and having easier levels at the start of each chapter. I think it would have been better for the game if the difficulty would have ramped up over the game's entirety, rather than having a ramp up and then a slowdown as each new chapter started. And while Boltgun isn't exactly a very difficult game, the combat arenas are a huge part of this game, and they're easily the most difficult areas. Much like in Doom 2016 or even Painkiller, you will come to an area and the way out will lock and the enemies will all spawn in. Your trusty Severos Skull companion tells you must purge before moving forward, and so purge you do. At first I felt these arenas were really fun, but I started to notice they were really only as fun as the level design. Some were way too small and cramped, making the combat significantly harder than it needed to be, while others were far too large and had the opposite effect. I found myself enjoying them less and less as the game went on, and towards the end of the game I began to wish they were not even in the game at all, as I started to find them very tedious. Especially because all the boss fights also happened in these arenas. Early on in the game, in one of the arenas, you'll fight a Lord of Change. As the first boss in the game, this is a Chaos Demon with a ton of intense attacks, like a line of sight attack that will absolutely melt you. This boss also has a humongous health pool, and while whittling down a large health bar is nothing new for this type of game, the annoyance is compounded by a slew of enemies with other large health bars also running around. I have always been highly critical of boss fights in these types of games, and I always have felt that putting regular enemies in boss arenas is taking the easy way out for developers. I would have liked to have seen something more dynamic with more interesting mechanics than a bullet sponge who does a fuck ton of damage surrounded by swarming enemies that also have big health bars, like the fucking Plague Toad. And while the Lord of Change seems like an in-chapter boss, it's not. That's a Chaos Sorcerer, and that fight is basically the exact same thing, but the Sorcerer has different spells. In fact, the Lord of Change becomes a regular in the game, and you have to repeat this fight several times during the game.
Death to the foul warriors of chaos.
And there is a sorcerer at the end of each chapter as well, with the third chapter being, well, really extra. It becomes rather tiresome, and I can honestly see some people throwing their hands up at the repeated boss fights, as really the only thing that changes is that in the later boss fights you have some better weapons. Now listen, maybe there was a development time crunch and they just had to repeat the same content over and over to get the game done. However, I feel like this was a super missed opportunity to do something really cool. Warhammer is not lacking in creatures, so why not switch it up and add other bosses like a Chaos Spawn, for example? I think the only other criticism I have for this game is that the difficulty feels very inconsistent. As I said earlier, it's a fairly easy game, and the difficulty doesn't really even kick off until the 3rd or even 4th level. Even then, with the amount of health and armor shards lying around, a seasoned shooter fan should have no issue getting through it. If the enemies are not charging at you, they're standing still and just shooting at you, and I think the only real difficult areas in this game are the ones where you get swarmed in tight places, or against the bosses that have a bullshit amount of health. And I guess these charging guys that are way faster than you kind of fucking suck, especially because they hit hard and they'll respawn if you don't give them. But as far as boomer shooters go, this one's on the easier side of things. But hey, maybe that's the whole point. We are a badass, iconic ultramarine after all. There's not a lot that can slow us down. Despite a few of my nitpicks and criticisms, I have to make sure you understand, none of them detract from this being a damn fine game. I feel like as I do these reviews, it's my job to overanalyze and find things to pick at that other gamers just may not notice, and that was certainly the case here. Boltgun is an excellent game and a prime example of where I wish gaming was today. I mean, there is no battle pass, no crates to open, I experienced little to no frame drops, no bugs, and the whole experience was a complete one. Not only was the game a throwback and a nod to boomer shooters, it was also a nod to the good old days where companies put out completed products. And for that, instead of praising the Emperor, I'm going to give the praise to the development team. Is that heresy?
My love of the Imperium is matched only by my hatred of the heretic.
So go out and buy Boltgun, as this is one of the easiest recommendations I've ever been able to make in a long time. It looks amazing, it sounds amazing, the music slaps, it's fun to play, it's violent, gory, exciting, and it has at least 8+ hours of content. And sure, while I wish that some of the repetition of the game regarding the arenas and the bosses maybe could have been switched up, it was not enough to sway me from having a good time with this game. If you guys do end up playing Boltgun, please make sure you come back to the comments and let me know about it. I'd love to hear if my review actually helped you. I really do appreciate you guys taking the time to check out my content. This one was a whirlwind to make, as I felt like I had to get the video out quickly for you all, so it would mean a ton if you guys would hit that like button and maybe even subscribe if you haven't already. As always, I'm Salty Octopus, and I'll see you next time.